Ahsoka Tano is an extremely popular character in the Star Wars universe, so for many Star Wars fans, after seeing her in The Mandalorian, it seemed like an obvious idea to give her her own show. I mean, after all, we're talking about the most badass character in the entire Clone Wars series, in my opinion. Which, by the way, I also want to add, the Clone Wars is perhaps one of the most underrated shows in Star Wars, let alone TV in general. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the character Ahsoka. Her battle with Darth Maul and being the Padawan of Anakin Skywalker.
You will not take it from me!
The only Padawan, as far as I know, being at his side throughout the entire run of the Clone Wars series automatically makes her a fan favorite. I mean, how she walked away from the Jedi Order when she realized just how flawed they actually really are. You have to admire her ability to chart her own path, and casting Rosario Dawson was, in my opinion, the perfect person to play her. Now, I know Star Wars hasn't really been in its golden age as of recently, but I do feel like Ahsoka is one of the shining lights that Disney's put out in recent memory in regards to Star Wars. And anyone who was a fan of the Clone Wars animated series and of the Star Wars Rebels, seeing some of your favorite characters come to life is a dream come true. So I thought, what better way, as someone who was both a fan of Star Wars Rebels and of Star Wars Clone Wars, to give my breakdown of Ahsoka Season 1, starting with Episode 1. We get the typical Star Wars text scroll cluing us into what's going on as of right now before our story begins. In this particular episode, the text reads, "The evil galactic empire has fallen, and a new republic has risen to take its place. However, sinister agents are already at work to undermine the fragile peace. A plot is underway to find the lost Imperial Grand Admiral Thrawn and bring him out of exile. Once presumed dead, rumors are spreading of Thrawn's return, which would galvanize the Imperial remnants and start another war. Former Jedi Knight Ahsoka Tano captured one of Thrawn's allies and learned of a secret map which is vital to the enemy's plan. Ahsoka now searches for the map as prisoner Morgan Elsbeth is transported to the New Republic for trial." The episode opens up with a military Republic freighter, or what I can only assume to be a freighter. I'm no expert ship guy, so don't crucify me if I get it wrong. Doing its rounds in space, as one does in Star Wars. We see a very arrogant captain of this freighter who is told that a ship is approaching.
"A ship has entered this sector. It isn't home one."
I can only assume, since he's a male character, it's the reason behind why he's so egotistical. The captain's told that an unidentified ship is approaching, and the captain tells them in a very arrogant voice to have the ship identify themselves.
Comms. Ask them to identify themselves and transmit their clearance code.
Much to the surprise of everybody, the ship uses old Jedi codes as clearance, but the egotistical captain doesn't believe him.
"The signal is an old Jedi clearance code. They say they're here to see the prisoner."
I'm calling their bluff.
We see what obviously looks like an Imperial-type shuttle approach the freighter. I don't really understand again why this captain thought it was a good idea to let what could possibly be evil actors into his prison, and especially since they made it very clear that the only reason they were there was to speak to their prisoner.
You put on a good show, but I don't buy it.
So, of course, the non-Jedis end up killing everybody on board and free the prisoner. Who could have seen that coming? Definitely not this guy. We come to find out that the reason these non-Jedi are interested in this freighter is because they're carrying a prisoner that knows the whereabouts of an orb that contains a map. We'll come to find out, though, that Ahsoka already interrogated the prisoner and the whereabouts of the map, which is where we join her. I do gotta say, Ahsoka looks great in live action, especially since she's being played by Rosario Dawson. And I thought it was pretty neat how they were able to show how much she's grown as a Jedi with just the way she carries her lightsabers. And of course, Ahsoka retrieves this mysterious golden ball that carries a map, but not before being ambushed on her way out. Ahsoka easily defeats the droids that ambush her, but before she can calmly walk away, they begin a self-destruct sequence, which causes Ahsoka to need to run to get out of Dodge super fast. Luckily for Ahsoka, her droid is ready and waiting to pick her up before her inevitable demise by what can only be compared to as a nuclear bomb that these droids were carrying. I mean, seriously, I feel like those bombs were a bit overkill for the droids, but I guess that's just how the Empire rolls. It just felt like overkill to blow up the entire area. Anyway, after Ahsoka retrieves the item that she's looked for, she arrives back at one of the rebel ships that happen to be waiting nearby. The effects on the show look really good, especially for a TV show. As Ahsoka exits the ship, we're greeted by another popular character from Rebels and Clone Wars, and that is General Zendula, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who I have to say I'm a huge fan of. I mean, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, anyone? One way I kind of look at this show is as a live-action sequel to Star Wars Rebels, which it basically is. So if you're a fan of Star Wars Rebels, you will definitely be a fan of Ahsoka, as it appears to be a continuation of their story post Return of the Jedi. I'm not shocked though, seeing as Dave Filoni, who was the major force behind both Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, loves these characters since he was the one who created them. We find out that it's possible that Admiral Thrawn could still be alive, and that Ahsoka says that there's whispers of Admiral Thrawn's return means that it's possible that Ezra, who was the main character of Star Wars Rebels, could still possibly be alive. I'm certainly excited to see the live-action Ezra Bridger. While Ahsoka's talking to General Syndulla, she suggests talking to her, which could only mean Sabine Wren, played by Natasha Bordizzo.
Commander Sabine Wren. Sabine Wren.
Get out there and say something.
What?
We catch up with Sabine on her speeder, getting the hell out of Dodge as she was supposed to give a speech and a commemoration of her victory over the Empire. A couple of X-Wing type aircraft try to cut her off, but of course she's a rebel, so she rebels and escapes in glorious fashion. Sabine ends up getting back to her home, which could use a little TLC, and she ends up playing a holograph message from Ezra Bridger. It's our first look at Bridger, who looks great in live action, but then again, maybe I'm just happy to see a little testosterone in this show that isn't evil or a complete idiot. We come to find out that the prisoner that escaped is one of the Night Sisters of Dothmir, the same planet that Darth Maul came from. The non-Jedis end up sending Baylan Skoll's apprentice Shin after them on Lothal. Ahsoka visits Sabine to show her the little gadget map that she's found. This is the first time that Ahsoka has seen Sabine since a couple of years, and you can tell right away that Sabine and Ahsoka have had a bit of a falling out since the end of the Star Wars Rebels. Ahsoka tells Sabine that Ezra could still be out there, which is more than enough for Sabine to be on board. She wants her man back. Ahsoka shows the map to Sabine and suggests that there must be some type of key or codex to open it, which in reality, I'm shocked that Ahsoka doesn't put together that all you need to do is match up a certain pattern to open it. You know, for Ahsoka being a Jedi for so long, she sure missed a huge obvious pattern on the map that I feel like most of us would have probably figured out just by playing around with the damn thing. Sabine asked if she can take the map to go study it, which Ahsoka says, I don't think that's a good idea. But of course, Sabine takes it anyway, because Sabine gives no fucks when it comes to finding Ezra. We find out that the leader of the non-Jedis is a guy named Baylan Skoll. And it just so happens that the Republic has a way of identifying lightsabers, which is how they find out who Baylan is. When Ahsoka ends up returning, of course Sabine is gone with the map. We see Sabine being tailed by a scout droid, which leads back to Skoll's apprentice Shin, who has been keeping an eye on Sabine. Again, I realize that Sabine is supposed to be the tech one, but I'm really shocked again that Ahsoka couldn't figure out that all you gotta do is twist a little bit. And I'm pretty sure it only takes Sabine like 3 turns to figure out how to open this puzzle. Again, I just feel like most of us would have figured this out just by messing around with the thing. The second you're holding it, you could probably realize that it turns and you would just turn it around. But no, she needs a gadget expert to look at it. And I feel like my 10-year-old child could have figured out that map with just a couple twists and turns. Sabine ends up figuring out the map. Again, that any toddler probably could have figured out if they played with it long enough. And as she's celebrating figuring out the map, she's attacked by Shin, who's Skoll's apprentice, who after a long battle ends up stabbing Sabine in the abdomen. I will say there's one interesting moment where when Sabine's looking to defend herself, you see her Mandalorian outfit under the bed, but she elects to go with the lightsaber, like she's choosing to be a Jedi over a Mandalorian in this moment. Ahsoka arrives just in time to save Sabine, and even though Ahsoka has the opportunity to go after the map, she elects to stay and save Sabine, which I think signifies the bond that the rebels still have for one another. And that is how episode 1 ends. Now, let's get on to episode 2. Episode Episode 2 opens up with Ashoka standing bedside by Sabine, who is clearly having a bad dream about Ezra Bridger. Sabine tells Ashoka that she unlocked the map just before it was taken, very conveniently. Although, to be honest, I feel like had the non-Jedis played with the map long enough, they would have been able to open it themselves. Sabine tells Ashoka, "You need my help," and Ashoka big sisses her and says, "You've done enough."
You need my help. No. You've done enough.
You know, maybe if the Jedi didn't always treat their apprentices like children, some of them might not turn to the dark side. Just a food for thought.
What? Now you tripping, dog. Shut your damn mouth and quit pretending you're smarter than the Council, you dipshit.
We join up with the non-Jedis who have already figured out the map and how to use it. Ahsoka goes to Sabine's house, I guess to do some type of investigation into the attack on Sabine, only to be ambushed by droids that are waiting for her in the rafters. Ahsoka dispatches them like they're nothing. Ahsoka brings back the head of the droid that she destroyed, which conveniently is able to be rewired to see its memory core and show who sent it there and where they went. Sabine's able to get the memory core out of the droid's head just in time before it explodes, killing everybody. Sabine tells General Syndulla that she doesn't think Ahsoka wants her help, which General Syndulla says yes she does, which suggests to me an awkward relationship between Sabine and Ahsoka still exists, where Ahsoka is expecting Sabine to live up to her expectations of her, and Sabine is feeling the pressure of that. We visit the non-Jedis who are looking at the map to locate General Thrawn. Shin asks Skull what happens when we find Thrawn.
What happens when we find Thrawn?
For some, war. For others, a new beginning.
And for us?
Power. Such as you've never dreamed.
Which I thought was actually a really cool line. So we jump to a naval yard where Syndulla and Ahsoka are at what looks like an Imperial boneyard where they're stripping parts down of Imperial ships to redistribute them to other parts of the galaxy that may need them. But they're there to review one of the suspects' former work areas. Syndulla asks Ahsoka to bring Sabine on as her apprentice again, to which Ahsoka says that Sabine is not ready. To which Syndulla says,
"I'm curious, what makes someone ready?"
And I agree. I mean, she's already saved the Empire. What more could she possibly need to be ready? Sabine wrestles with whether or not Ahsoka actually wants to teach her how to use the Force and train her as a Jedi, or if Ahsoka doesn't want to, which we just clearly heard her say she doesn't really want to teach Sabine. I find Sabine to be a very interesting character because, well, she's not really proficient in the Force as many Padawans would be. She's still being trained as a Jedi, even though she doesn't have any natural Force capabilities that most Force wielders would have. And that, in my opinion, makes for a very interesting case, and not something we see in Star Wars very often. General Syndulla and Ahsoka are poking around the shipyard. They come across the hyperdrive that is obviously too big for any of the rebel ships to fit in. So Syndulla asks, what starship is that going to? And the ship guy says,
"Oh, there it is. Classified."
It's going to a classified ship, to which she says,
"Nothing's classified to me."
Which I totally agree. If you're the head of the Rebel Alliance, you probably should have access to everything, but this brings up the interesting notion that there's something weird out there that's going on that Rebel leaders in the Republic are not seeing. You can tell the guy at the shipyard is only interested in money and doesn't really care about the Republic or the Empire, just whoever will make him rich, which puts him in a weird position here as he eventually does fork over the information for the classified tablet. But it definitely opens up a more interesting aspect going on here, highlighting people who don't care about good and evil and are just into their own self-interest, which would be something that happens in real life, I'd assume. As soon as Ahsoka and General Syndulla seem to be about to break the case wide open, a bunch of Imperial loyalists says, which obviously are dealt with very easily by Ahsoka, but it goes to show you that there are still many Imperial sympathizers that still exist in the world, even though the Empire has fallen. As the saboteurs are trying to escape the yard, General Syndulla and Ahsoka give chase when an Inquisitor appears to challenge Ahsoka. While General Syndulla gives chase to the escaping ship, Ahsoka is able to fend off the Inquisitor. And General Syndulla is able to tag the escaping ship with a tracker just before it enters lightspeed. We flash back to Sabine, who is back at her home, and she begins to pull out her Mandalorian armor, almost as if a way of recognizing that she most likely is not meant to be a Jedi at this moment and should be a Mandalorian once again, which personally I think suits her more. I'm disappointed though that Sabine cuts her hair because first off, she looked gorgeous with the long hair, but I feel like it's more symbolism that she's not walking the path of a Jedi anymore and will be walking the path of a Mandalorian. Again, the people from the Imperial shipyard are arrested and Ahsoka is greeted with a hologram message message from Sabine in her Mandalorian armor saying she's ready. She might not be ready as a Jedi, but she's damn sure ready as a Mandalorian. Pretty cool moment here, and it's like the old band's back together. They're just missing Ezra. Ahsoka refers to Sabine as her Padawan here, letting us know that she is going to continue Sabine's training. Sabine and Ahsoka get a location on the tracker and begin to go after the escaped ship from the Imperial shipyard. Episode 2 ends with Baylan Skoll warning the non-Jedis that Ahsoka is coming and that her passion is unwavering. He also mentions that she's elusive to the Force. This is an interesting statement because it could be due to the fact that she's not a typical Jedi, so maybe she just only taps into the Force when she needs to, which makes her not as noticeable to other people who know the Force. I did find this to be an interesting statement by Baylan Skoll to end the episode. And that wraps up episode 2. Now on to episode 3. We open up episode 3 with Sabine continuing her lightsaber training, and needless to say, she's a bit rusty. They do the typical can't see training that is very well known in the Jedi Order, where you need to use more than just your eyes to defend yourself with the Force. As expected, Sabine can't see crap while she's getting trained. Cut over to the Rebel fleet where General Syndulla meets with the Chancellor. General Syndulla tells the Chancellor that she believes that Grand Admiral Thrawn is up to no good, which of course the stereotypical political trope where politicians just don't believe the heroes because why should they? What could heroes possibly know that the senators don't know seems to take hold, as one of the Chancellor's side bitches claims that General Syndulla is only looking to secure more Republic resources in a folly attempt to find the fallen hero Ezra Bridger. If only in one of these shows the senators would actually be like, hey, we have whatever you need, we got you covered. But clearly this suggests that the Chancellor's side bitch is probably an Empire sympathizer. Either that or he's just incredibly retarded. We then see General Syndulla's son Jason, who looks like a regular human being, which shocks me considering that General Syndulla is green with tentacles coming out of her head. I guess human genes are just that stubborn even in the Star Wars universe. Sabine practices trying to move a coffee cup, which you know you've done at some point if you're a fan of the Force. You know we've all done it. Try to move something with our hands to try to see if we're Force sensitive. You know you've done it. Don't lie to yourself. However, as I said before, I do think Sabine not being Force sensitive but still being trained as a Jedi makes for a very interesting storyline at the very least. Ahsoka's ship eventually gets jumped by some of the non-Jedis, which forces Ahsoka and Sabine to have to work together to keep the ship from being destroyed. Eventually, they do end up working together after a couple of disagreements, at least well enough to fend off some of the attacking ships. Eventually, Ahsoka's ship takes a hit that immobilizes it, but that doesn't stop Ahsoka, who with nothing but a spacesuit and a lightsaber goes outside to help protect her ship and fend off people who are about to destroy her ship. Ahsoka manages to take out one of the attacking ships in one of the most badass moments in any Star Wars episode I can think of, where she literally just jumps up and hits it with her lightsaber as it's coming by. I thought this was a really cool and creative moment to show just how resourceful Ahsoka is as a character. Then out of nowhere, one of these giant space whales conveniently appear, causing the attacking ships to lose sight of Ahsoka and her ship. And even though the space whale sequence was really interesting and cool visually, it does kind of seem like a convenient plot device, but either way, it was still cool and a pretty rad scene. I also wanted to add that the non-Jedi attacking ships are really cool. They reminded me of World War II Navy planes, which I haven't seen in Star Wars before. I hope to see these kinds of ships appear in the future of Star Wars because they were really neat to look at, especially me being a fan of World War II aircraft. Eventually, Sabine lands, shutting down all the engines and even the droids so that they won't get picked up by any type of scanner. After they feel like they're safe and that the planes have left them, that's what I'm referring to them as planes since they look like planes, they fire everything back up. Apparently, the space whales they saw were the same space whales that Ezra saw at the end of Rebels. Baylan Skoll sends out a ground search party to go look for Ahsoka and Sabine, which ends up wrapping up episode 3. Episode 4 opens up with Sabine and Wu-Tang, the ship's droid, trying to get enough power to the ship to restore communications. So Sabine and Ahsoka are essentially stranded with the enemy bearing down on them. Ahsoka tells Sabine that if they can't make the journey to get Ezra back, then nobody should, which obviously pisses off Sabine because she ain't about that life. Ezra's her man. But Ahsoka's reasoning behind this is so that Thrawn doesn't come back as the inheritor of the Empire. Ultimately, Sabine plays along with what Ahsoka's saying because it's true, and that no matter how much they miss their friend Ezra, he sacrificed himself to remove Thrawn. I don't think he would support them bringing Thrawn back just to save him. There's an interesting dynamic here where Ahsoka wants to trust Sabine, but she does believe that Sabine will sacrifice the safety of the galaxy to get Ezra back if she has to. And I don't know if Ahsoka feels like that's worth it. Baylan Skoll's men begin to close in on Sabine and Ahsoka's location. Sabine and Ahsoka prepare for the impending attack. Wu-Tang ends up getting attacked by another droid, which is an epic battle between two droids fighting, alerting Ahsoka and Sabine to come out and help fend off the attack. We cut back to the hangar where General Syndulla decides that she's not gonna just sit around and wait. So she goes after Sabine and Ahsoka with a group of X-Wing in tow. Morgan, who's the witch lady, ends up using a map to pinpoint the exact location where General Thrawn is, or at least where he's expected to be. We see Ahsoka and Sabine running towards the base, but before they can even get there, they're headed off by an Inquisitor and Skull's apprentice, Shin. Sabine takes on Shin while Ahsoka focuses on the Inquisitor. Ahsoka makes pretty damn short work of the Inquisitor in epic fashion. Obi-Wan would be so proud. And Sabine tells Ahsoka to go. I got this.
Get the map! Got this.
You will regret this decision.
Ahsoka catches up with Baylan Skoll, who's there to protect the map. Baylan says that
Anakin spoke highly of you.
Interesting. He never mentioned you.
which I just thought was like a pretty good diss. Ahsoka ends up battling Baylan Skoll. Baylan's apprentice Shin ends up getting away from Sabine and shows up at the battle between Ahsoka and Baylan. Shin tries to take the map, but Ahsoka uses a force throw to throw her against the rocks, knocking her out of the battle. Baylan tells her that was very unwise and backs her up to the corner of the cliff, where Sabine shows up. Sabine grabs the map, points her gun at it, and Ahsoka says,
Destroy it!
but obviously Sabine doesn't want to destroy it because it might be the only way that she can get back to Ezra eventually. Baylan ends up knocking Ahsoka off the cliff. Sabine shoots at him, but he easily blocks her blaster fire. She warns him that she'll destroy it, but Baylan ends up calling her bluff because he knows that she won't destroy it because she wants to find Ezra. Baylan tells Sabine to join him on this trip, and if she does willingly, no harm will come to her, and he will reunite her with Ezra. Sabine hands the map back to Baylan Skoll. Shin, Baylan's apprentice, begins to force choke Sabine, which Baylan ends up telling her to cut that shit out because he gave his word to her that she would be unharmed. And unlike Ahsoka, Baylan says he keeps his word. Once coordinates are retrieved, Baylan destroys the map. However, General Syndulla and her X-Wing fighters are quickly approaching. But Syndulla and her team are in the way of Baylan's ship when they engage the hyperdrive towards the map coordinates. And this ends up destroying 2 of the X-Wings and almost lays waste to the rest of the squadron that came with General Syndulla. But unfortunately for the General, Baylan's ship escapes along with the coordinates. We cut to Ahsoka, who has now found herself in some space-like realm similar to the one that Ezra was in during Star Wars Rebels, when who of all should appear but motherfucking Anakin Skywalker. And that ends up wrapping up episode 4. Episode 5 starts off with General Syndulla landing on the planet where the previous battle in episode 4 just took place. Syndulla, not being able to locate Ahsoka or Sabine, radios back that she feels like they missed the party.
I got nothing down here. Looks like we missed the party.
General Syndulla walks over to Wu Yang holding Sabine's Mandalorian helmet. Wu Yang says,
I told them to stay together. But they never listen. They never listen.
They never listen. We catch up with Ahsoka, who is still in the Jedi realm. That's what I'm calling it, for lack of a better term. She tells Anakin that he looks the same.
You look the same.
You look old.
Damn, Anakin. I don't know if anybody told you this, but you never say that to a lady. Anakin tells Ahsoka he's there to finish her training. I know a lot of people are very critical of Aiden Christensen's portrayal of Anakin Skywalker, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was super excited to see him show up in this show. All the nostalgia, baby. Jason, who is General Syndulla's son, says that he feels something out there in the water. And seeing as Kanan Jarrus, who was the father of Jason from Star Wars Rebels, was a Jedi, I'm not surprised to see that Jason is Force sensitive. Jason and General Syndulla close their eyes and are able to hear lightsabers, which are obviously coming from the battle going on between Ahsoka and Anakin in the Jedi realm. Wu Yang tells Carson that Jason is Force sensitive, and I gotta admit, Carson's reaction to this is hilarious.
Jason has abilities. His father, Kanan Jarrus, was a Jedi.
Okay. We better get on it then.
Carson's like the most realistic guy in this whole universe and just kind of takes things in stride. He never really seems shocked by like anything he hears because he's basically experienced some of the strangest events in Star Wars, so nothing surprises him. However, I do find it funny that General Syndulla seems to just abandon her kid on the rocks for some reason. I don't want to be a Star Wars parent here, but considering that she has no idea what actually happened here, leaving your kid alone with a droid doesn't seem like the safest move. But anyway, you do you. We cut back to Ahsoka and Anakin going at it in the Jedi realm. Anakin tells Ahsoka, "I didn't teach you everything," and we get a cool flashback to the Clone Wars here. This makes this my favorite episode by far. Allow me to take a second here to let you know that if you haven't seen Star Wars Clone Wars animated series, I highly suggest you check it out. It's one of the greatest animated series ever put together. It got me through my withdrawal. Well, we're not going to talk about that. We see young Ahsoka showing compassion to the fallen Clone Wars soldier. I feel like they didn't want to pay Tamara Morrison to show up here, which is why they cover the faces of the dead soldiers, but it would have been a nice nod to the Clone Wars soldiers themselves. There's a cool shot here where after the conversation between Ahsoka and Anakin, as Anakin's walking away from her, Anakin transforms into Darth Vader for a split second. Kind of like a nod to who he will become in the future, at least. During the timeline, since this is a flashback. And since the time that this show takes place is post Return of the Jedi, technically he's already been Darth Vader and been defeated. So maybe it's more of a nod to the dark side that lies within Anakin. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. We see Jason, who again was left behind by everybody in their starships looking out on the water as they search for Ahsoka. But obviously the X-Wings don't have the technology to pick up Force realms. So essentially they're flying around not looking for anything physical. It does show the commitment though of General Syndulla to find her friends when they're in trouble. We get another flashback to the Clone Wars. I could never get enough flashbacks to live action Clone Wars. And this one's really rewarding to anybody who's actually watched the Clone Wars because it takes place during the Mandalore fight between Darth Maul and his Mandalore warriors against Ahsoka and the clone faction. It's fan service like this that makes me really appreciate this show and why this show shines in my opinion. We get a chance to see even Captain Rex. The nostalgia is freaking real, baby. I do appreciate the show's continuity commitment here though by showing that Anakin acknowledging that he was never actually a part of the Battle of Mandalore, because at that point they parted ways. But in my opinion, this particular part of the Clone Wars saga was the best. Eventually Ahsoka says to Anakin,
I choose to live.
There's hope for you yet.
Ahsoka falls into what looks like water and eventually rises to the surface of the real water. Now being in the physical realm is picked up by the scanners in the Republic ships. Ahsoka uses her powers with the Force while holding the map to go over what happened with Sabine and Skull. Much to Ahsoka's surprise, she realizes that Sabine willingly went with Skull and his crew. Carter tells General Syndulla that the Republic fleet is on their way and he doesn't think they're coming to help. Because remember, after all, General Syndulla went to this planet to get Ahsoka without the consent of the Republic. Ahsoka, now by herself, looks up to see the star whales above her. The Chancellor radios in to tell General Syndulla that the Senate is debating on whether or not to suspend her authority. Ahsoka remembers that the whales are able to travel intergalactically, which gives her the idea to use them to take her to where Sabine and Skull went. Ahsoka steps out to speak to the whales through the Force while the Republic fleet approaches. Syndulla tells Carson to stall the fleet as to not scare the pod. Carson does somewhat of a good job trying to stall the fleet in a really comedic moment in the show.
This is Captain Teva out of Adelphi Base. Please identify yourself.
Captain Teva, why aren't you far from home?
Repeat, please identify yourself.
Ahsoka successfully convinces the whale to open its mouth and let Ahsoka ride in its mouth to wherever it is that they go.
You're certain they know where Sabine was taken?
I have no idea.
What? It could go anywhere.
That's better than going nowhere.
She doesn't know for sure where they're going, but she's hoping for the best. The Republic fleet says, use evasive maneuvers to avoid the whales, but they accidentally almost end up crashing into all of them, which probably would have made for a really interesting episode. Could you imagine the end of episode 5 is the entire Republic fleet getting destroyed by a bunch of star whales?
Well, how could they be jamming us if they don't know?
Don't let them chew your oars, boys!
A whale.
Yes.
It's a trap!
So it's true?
Yes. Too much is true.
Now, on to episode 6. Episode 6 starts off with the whales traveling through hyperspace between galaxies with Ashoka in one of their mouths. Only in Star Wars could that be a way to start an episode. Yeah, don't mind us, we're just traveling in between galaxies at the speed of light in a star whale's mouth. Ashoka tells Wu Yang that she withheld information from General Syndulla that Sabine went with the enemy willingly. We see Sabine locked up in Skull's ship. She tells Skulls, "We had a deal," which he just looks at her and smirks. They now refer to Sabine as the prisoner. Skull's ship exits hyperspace, showing a whale graveyard. The witch says that the planet that they arrived at is an ancestral home for the Dothmiri. I keep wanting to call them the Dothraki, like from Game of Thrones, but I know that they're actually the witches of Dothmir. I'm not crazy. I just, for some reason, just keep trying to not call them Dothraki. It turns out that her people used to use the whales to traverse between galaxies, much like Ahsoka's doing right now. And it turns out that the star whales go here to die, which is why there's so many star whale bones everywhere. Skull's crew lands on the planet that looks pretty habitable, to be honest with you. There's ruins everywhere, and I'll be honest, the planet looks really neat. When they arrive, there's 3 witches there. The witches end up taking Sabine and locking her away and calling her a threat, as they promise that Grand Admiral Thrawn is coming. Shin, who's Skull's apprentice, seems weary that there's more witches, almost like she's kind of upset about it. Skull tells Shin that being on this planet is folly, because when he was being raised as a Jedi in the temple, they would tell stories of this ancient place. Folk tales come to life is what he said, assuming the old stories are true. This suggests that Skull isn't just after the Empire, he's after so much more. I will say that Skull says something interesting here, and that is that the cycle of the Jedi rising and then falling and then rising again, the cycle just seems to continue to repeat because of the balance that the Force requires. Sabine tries to use the Force to then free herself, but unfortunately she fails again. We see an Imperial starship approach. Inside the starship, there's hundreds and hundreds of stormtroopers, and walking through the middle of them all is Grand Admiral Thrawn. I will say this is one hell of an entrance for Grand Admiral Thrawn. Sabine is brought to Grand Admiral Thrawn, and Admiral Thrawn ends up allowing Sabine to go search out Ezra on a wolf-looking creature. Thrawn says, "You risk the fate of the galaxy in hopes of finding Ezra Bridger alive." I will say that I think that it shows a lot of complexity regarding the character of Admiral Thrawn. Then instead of just killing Sabine, he allows her to go leave and search out Ezra. But anybody who knows the character Thrawn knows that there's a secondary agenda here. He wouldn't just let her go if it doesn't give him some type of tactical advantage. That's Thrawn's whole thing, is being super tactical. But again, it's characters like this that make Star Wars so interesting to me. And we end up learning that the reason that Thrawn let Sabine leave in the first place is so that he can send Skull and Shin after Sabine, and then once she finds Ezra Bridger, he's going to use them to kill them. I find it interesting that Shin questions Skull about honoring his agreement to Sabine, kind of suggesting that Shin might still have a bit of a moral compass inside of her of some kind that may pay off in future seasons, where we see her betray Skull or something. Sabine, on her horse dog, which I'm going to call it, begins to search for Ezra Bridger on the ancient planet. Sabine's then attacked by a group of random outlaws, causing her wolf horse to run away. Sabine ends up holding off the bandits, but they broke her navigation tool that was helping her find Bridger. Now Sabine without transportation, and her navigation tool is on foot, with Shin and Skull on their own wolf horses in pursuit. Thrawn tells the witch leader that his main objective is to leave this planet whether or not the mercenaries are with him, the mercenaries being Skull and Shin, and that they don't matter to him, suggesting future betrayal by Thrawn to Shin and Skull. Sabine yells at her wolf horse for not staying loyal to her and running away during the battle when she was attacked by the bandits, but the wolf horse is pretty stubborn and wants to keep going with Sabine. They're like big puppies, which I think adds a nice little bit of sunshine in these dark times during the episode. It's a good thing though that Sabine decided to be nice to her wolf, as her wolf seems to uncover what looks like a type of turtle man. I know that these aliens probably all have names, but I'm too lazy to go look them all up, so I'm sorry. So unfortunately, you'll just have to deal with my unintelligent descriptions of these alien creatures during this breakdown. The well-dressed turtle-looking creature is literally wearing a three-piece suit, which I think makes his drip on point. The turtle creature ends up recognizing the rebel symbol that is on Sabine's clothes, suggesting to Sabine that he's seen it before, or she's seen it before. I don't know what the sex of these turtle things are. So now Sabine and her wolf horse follow the little well-dressed turtle creatures. Oh my god. It's so hard to say this stuff. But unfortunately, Skull and Shin are still on her tail as they come across the bodies that Sabine left behind from her ambush. Shin asks Skull if he misses the order, referring to the Jedi Order, and Skull says he misses the idea of it, but they were too weak to ever continue going forever. And I guess I understand that the Jedi had the Emperor Palpatine in their ranks the whole time and never even realized it. Hell, they didn't even notice it. They gave him more power and helped him like complete his agenda. If you can't admit that the Jedi Order was a little bit flawed, then you're lying to yourself. But the Jedi did mean well. Eventually, the same bandits that attack Sabine show up to Skull and Shin, but Skull says,
"The enemy of our enemy is our friend, for now,"
and plans to use the bandits to help find Sabine. Sabine stumbles upon an entire well-dressed turtle civilization, and you get to see a little well-dressed baby turtle, which was adorable. You can tell that the little well-dressed turtle civilization is full of peaceful creatures, when out of nowhere, Ezra Bridger appears. Ezra gives Sabine a big hug, and the little well-dressed turtles begin to celebrate. Ezra tells Sabine thank you for coming, and that he can't wait to go home. But clearly, Ezra doesn't know that Sabine signed up with Skull and Shin, and that going home is not going to be an easy thing. The witches of Dathomir alert the Grand Admiral Thrawn that Ahsoka Tano is on her way, riding a whale. I'll tell you, these witches are Thrawn's like greatest asset at the moment. Grand Admiral Thrawn says that if a star whale approaches their planet, to destroy it with prejudice. This ends up wrapping up episode 6. Episode 7 starts off with General Syndulla in front of the Republic Council on trial for supposedly abusing her power. Senator Xiono, who seems to only be in the show to be a complete shithead towards anybody who actually does something productive for the Republic, General Syndulla stunts on Xiono and says that
protected the New Republic by ignoring direct orders.
No, I protected the New Republic by ignoring you.
Of course, the jackass member of the Senate wants to have General Syndulla court-martialed. I can't tell if Xiono's in this because he's completely stupid or if he's like an Empire sympathizer. But I do think this is kind of a reflection on our own government by ignoring glaring issues that need to be addressed. It doesn't look good for the general when, out of nowhere, one of the most legendary characters in all of Star Wars, C-3PO, manages to find his way into the chamber. He says that General Leia Organa herself told General Syndulla to go on that mission, which of course gets her off the hook because nobody's going to question Leia with anything. We all know that Senator Leia Organa didn't actually give that order. She's just trying to protect General Syndulla from getting court-martialed. And the Chancellor actually brings this up at some point. This causes General Syndulla to be released and not to be court-martialed from the Republic. We switch over to Ahsoka, who's training with a holographic version of Anakin. I guess it turns out that Anakin made recorded trainings for Ahsoka when she was younger. She says that she has 20 in total, which is convenient because that's just a way to keep bringing Anakin back. But I gotta say, it was nice of Anakin, while he was killing younglings, to take time out of his busy schedule to record some training sessions for Ahsoka.
It's treason then. It's over, Anakin. We have the moral high ground.
Ahsoka rides with the whales, but the whales are being attacked by the mines that were sent by Grand Admiral Thrawn. Ahsoka tries to escape through the debris field, causing the fighters that were dispatched to attack her to discontinue their pursuit. Grand Admiral Thrawn continues to stress the lack of resources that they have, which is why he withdrew the fighters, and he only wants to allocate them when he absolutely needs to. Ahsoka hides within the debris field and can't continue her landing on the planet. We join up with Ezra and Sabine, who are traveling with the little well-dressed turtles. Sabine catches up Ezra on all the things that have happened in Return of the Jedi. We now see Skull and Shin have recruited the bandits that attacked Sabine earlier. Grand Admiral Thrawn, who busts out his best weapon, the Witches of Dathomir, are able to locate where Ahsoka's hiding. Ahsoka tries to use the Force to reach out to Sabine, but before she can actually locate Sabine properly, she's attacked when the Witches of Dathomir locate her. This forces Ahsoka to try to make a break for the planet to try to get to where Sabine and Ezra are. But Grand Admiral Thrawn, being so intelligent when it comes to tactics, knows exactly what Ahsoka's next move is.
No, we're not the focus of the Jedi's attention. Tana will pursue Sabine Wren, whom we have wisely sent far from here.
The little turtle group ends up seeing Skull and Shin staring at them on the mountainside. Skull and Shin stay on their horses, their dog horses, and send the bandits after them, with Shin slowly following after her. She asks Skull why he's not helping, and he says,
Your ambition drives you in one direction. My path lies in another.
his destiny is set towards a different path, and that her defeating Ezra and Sabine will guarantee her place in the Empire. The bandits chase down the turtle people in their little turtle cars and eventually immobilize one, causing Ezra to stop to have to face these people with Sabine. While the chase is going on, Ashoka is also on her way to where they are, in her starship. Eventually, Ahsoka's dropped directly next to Skull, who I guess has no choice now but to battle. Sabine tries to give Ezra his lightsaber back.
Do your thing.
What thing? You keep it.
What?
The Force is my ally. That's all I need.
Which I was a little disappointed about because I was hoping to see Ezra tear some stuff up with his lightsaber, but I guess they gotta build that anticipation.
Close.
Shin knocks out Ezra with a force push, so I guess the force wasn't his ally after all, considering it knocked him out. These forces ain't loyal. So now Sabine is fighting Shin while Ahsoka is fighting Skull. I'm a little disappointed that Sabine is not fighting in her Mandalorian armor, but I guess these actors want FaceTime, which is the #1 killer of so many comic book movies. Like, just wear the Mandalorian armor. You know, it looks great. I know you probably can't see shit out of it, an actress, but just wear the stuff to make the fans happy. Grand Admiral Thrawn decides to recall the whole area since his soldiers got their butts kicked. Ahsoka offers Shin to join them, and Shin decides not to, so they just kind of let her walk off. They don't even try to take her prisoner or anything. They just let her walk away. Ezra gives Ahsoka a big hug. Ezra ends the episode saying, "Guys, I think I'm going home after all."
I think I might be going home after all.
And that wraps up episode 7. We're now on to the final episode, episode 8, which opens with Grand Admiral Thrawn planning his counterattack on the rebel group. Grand Admiral Thrawn states that he's watched so many Imperial commanders underestimate the power of a single Jedi, and states he will not let that happen to him again. The witch Morgan ends up getting a massive power up by the witches of Dothmir. She's given the gift of shadows for being the one who heard them from across the stars. She's also gifted a magic blade, and this sword is sweet. I mean, this thing is literally on fire. I will say I appreciate Star Wars for the fact that there's so many different types of powers that can make someone a nuisance in this universe. There's witches, there's Jedi, there's geniuses. It's all real neat. Ezra decides to build his own lightsaber with Wu Yang, and we find out that Wu Yang was the one who actually taught Kanan Jarrud how to build his lightsaber. It also turns out that Wu Yang was the one who taught younglings back in the Jedi Temple how to build their lightsabers as well, suggesting that Wu Yang is a very, very old droid. We also learned through Wu Yang that the reason that Ahsoka and Sabine have had such a rough relationship is due to the fact that apparently Sabine hasn't unlocked her true potential, and if she does, then she would be considered dangerous to Ahsoka. Speaking of Sabine and Ahsoka, the two are having a heart-to-heart when two TIE fighters begin to approach. They end up attacking the ship, causing the ship to begin to drop out of the air, which is caught by Ezra and Ahsoka to prevent it from smashing the little turtle community. They use the Force to try to hold it up. Eventually, they end up throwing it forward, and Sabine ends up crashing it into both TIE fighters, which destroys the TIE fighters, but also ends up crashing Ahsoka's ship. So Grand Admiral Thrawn ends up organizing a ground assault team, but Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra decide to go after the Star Destroyer. They try to storm Admiral Thrawn's Imperial Star Destroyer, but Admiral Thrawn opens fire on them, or as he put it,
rain hellfire upon them.
We finally get to see Ezra wield a lightsaber in live action, and it is as glorious as I expected it to be. Nothing against the predominantly female cast, but it's just nice to see a bro in there, sticking it to the Empire as well. The rebels end up taking out the stormtroopers in epic fashion while the witches begin chanting a spell. This spell brings the stormtroopers back to life after being taken out by the rebels. So now we have zombie stormtroopers. Now this show's getting a little nuts. No matter how often they cut down the stormtroopers, the witches just bring them right back to life. Eventually they escape by sealing the doors behind them, which lock the zombie stormtroopers out, and Grand Admiral Thrawn's Star Destroyer begins to link up with the hyperdrive. Grand Admiral Thrawn warns Head Witch Morgan that they need more time, telling her to essentially go down there and deal with the threat yourself. He says do it for the Empire, but then she says under her breath,
Death
Ahsoka squares off with the Super Saiyan witch now and sends Ezra and Sabine off to try to stop Thrawn. So while Ahsoka battles the head witch, Sabine and Ezra try to go after Thrawn. One of the zombie stormtroopers are about to finish off Sabine when finally her force powers awaken and she's able to summon her lightsaber to defeat the super zombie stormtrooper. Sabine's about to jump onto the Star Destroyer after using her force push to throw Ezra up onto the Star Destroyer, but then turns around to see Ahsoka behind her battling. Sabine is forced to make a decision: jump up with the Star Destroyer to help Ezra, or stay back and help Ahsoka. She ends up deciding to stay back and help Ahsoka, kind of sealing their friendship as Sabine is choosing Ahsoka over Ezra for the first time, while Ezra is up on the Star Destroyer himself. Ahsoka ends up killing the Lady Morgan with her own sword after hers was destroyed. Grand Admiral Thrawn decides to bombard the ancient temple where the witches were, destroying it, while Ahsoka and Sabine jump up onto Ahsoka's starship that has been fixed by Wu-Tang. They fly up to try to meet the starship where Ezra is, but I'm honestly surprised that the witches of Dathomir were just like, yeah, go ahead, destroy our temple. We never loved that thing anyway. It's only our ancient history. But just as Ahsoka and Sabine are about to board Thrawn's starship, Thrawn uses the hyperdrive to escape, yet again taking Ezra with him. They do all this work to get Ezra back just to lose him again to Thrawn, just in the other direction. Not all is lost though, as Ezra ends up escaping Thrawn's ship, reuniting with General Zendala, dressed as a stormtrooper. He must have somehow escaped Thrawn's starship. We see Shin become the leader of the bandits on the planet that attack Sabine, while Skull's in search of the creators of the Force, particularly the Balance, which if you want to find out more about them, you can go watch the Clone Wars episode where Anakin visits them and they want Anakin to like replace them. It's a whole big story. While Sabine and Ahsoka are trapped in another galaxy. The season closes out with an image of Ghost Anakin smiling at Ahsoka. In conclusion, I feel like the first season of Ahsoka was perhaps one of the shining stars that Star Wars put out since The Mandalorian. The fan service that rewarded those who watched Clone Wars or Rebels, this was a great way to continue those great shows. I'm sure many people haven't seen those animated series, but if you haven't, I highly suggest that if you enjoyed Ahsoka to go check out those shows, because it makes so much more sense. And for those of you who have seen both Star Wars Rebels and the Clone Wars series, then you can see why this show was so appealing. I feel like they could have done more with the Ezra character, but I also feel that like Ahsoka is the badass we've always imagined she was. It will be interesting to see what happens with Sabine and her powers, but overall, I would say Ahsoka was a really fun experience. Unfortunately, one of the actors, Ray, who played Baylan Skoll, passed away, but he's apparently being replaced by one of his closest friends. You may recognize him from Game of Thrones, where he played the Hound. I'll be excited to see what happens with his character as he moves forward. Will he become the almighty force that he wants to be? Or will Ahsoka and Sabine have to take him down before that happens? So many questions, but overall, considering the absolute disarray that I feel like Star Wars has been in as a franchise, with The Acolyte being like one of the worst shows ever, The Skeleton Crew, well, I need to do a review for that show. Let's just put it that way. I haven't finished it, so I can't really give it my final critique. But it was directed towards kids, which I think is more of a marketing tactic by Disney to induct more younger viewers into the Star Wars fandom, which, I mean, you can't blame them. I do feel like Ahsoka was really well done, and I think they did a lot of the characters justice, minus Ezra. I would have liked to see him more, but then again, I'm a guy, so I just like seeing other guys do cool shit, I guess. I definitely feel like Star Wars has a predominantly male audience. Obviously, there's still females out there that enjoy the show, but I don't think it hurts to throw some male characters in there to do some good. When I was growing up, everybody who liked Star Wars was a guy, and all the girls would be like, ew, Star Wars is for dorks, you know? And I feel like Star Wars and Disney especially have kind of led towards this female-driven superhero narrative, and while that's all well and good, I do feel like the lack of any testosterone in any of these shows or movies does have implications which could cause predominantly male viewers to not be as interested. Ahsoka did the female lead very well in the lack of any testosterone aside from Ezra, which didn't even impact the series until the last 2 episodes. And it was at least somewhat of a welcome shift. I think Disney needs to look at Ahsoka as a guide on how to do a proper Star Wars story. I think that Disney needs to pay attention that the most dedicated fan base are the guys that grew up wanting to be Luke Skywalker. Not exactly Mark Hamill, because he kind of sucks, but the character of Luke Skywalker when he was cool. Not the milk-drinking, smug-look Luke Skywalker that we ended up getting in the shithole of a film, The Last Jedi. That movie was an absolute pile of dog shit. I'm sorry if it upsets people. That's how I feel. When you take a character that's so beloved like Luke Skywalker and when you turn him into a senile old man, that's not really gonna go over well with fans. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this review and you want to see more like this, let me know in the comments if you want to see me review any specific shows. How did you feel about Ahsoka Season 1? And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Make sure you guys go subscribe and hit like if you enjoyed this. And if you didn't enjoy it, I don't know, I guess go kick rocks.